I'm Mike Ledbetter. I was a city council person from 1990 through 94 and 1996 through 2008.
Okay. And Mike, what are some of the big news stories that come to mind over the last 50 years or in the time you were involved with the City Hall?
Well, when I took office in 1990, it was with Donna Jordan and Brad Stein. We had all been elected at one time, and it was kind of a big deal because we became the council majority. And at that time, the big issue facing the city was development on the Carpinteria Bluffs, where the nature preserve is now. 200 or more condominiums were planned for that space, and the former city council was in favor of that plan. The community didn't seem to favor that plan and elected us to put an end to those plans and to do something for the bluffs that was more in line with the community's wishes for that area. So I went to the Coastal Commission and withdrew the application for development, brought it back to the City Council for further consideration, and that led to the establishment of the Bluffs Preserve that's there now. And that was a big accomplishment for our council at that time, and is one that has yielded great dividends for the city and visitors to that area who are enjoying a nature preserve that wouldn't otherwise have been there.
I believe somebody said that the Coastal Commission was about to approve the Bluffs development. Were they, or do you know one way or the other?
There were commissioners who were opposed to our withdrawing the application. So yes, they were poised to approve it at that time. We withdrew the application for further consideration and decided to withdraw the application as a city council after that. Also facing the council at that time were severe economic issues. The city's reserves were down below $200,000 at one point, which was a dire circumstance indeed. And so pretty drastic reorganization of City Hall and the employee structure at City Hall was undertaken and resulted in the reserves growing back to millions of dollars, where I think they still are.
You were part of a slate running with Brad and Donna, correct?
That's right.
What were the platforms of the slate? So there was the Bluffs and other development issues too?
The Bluffs and establishing a more citizen-friendly attitude on the council, one more responsive to the wishes of the community at large and less responsive to development interests and other special interests that had economics as a predominant concern rather than preserving the community's special nature. That was really what got us elected, I believe. People wanted to preserve Carpinteria's nature, its small town charm is a term that was used widely at that time. There had been an effort to establish a redevelopment agency as well. That was defeated before we got elected, before we even got the idea to run for office, and it was defeated by a tremendous margin. Over 70% of the voters rejected redevelopment, which turned out to be a big blessing because later redevelopment was repealed pretty much by the state legislature, and communities that had relied on that for economic growth were in a very bad shape, much like the city of Guadalupe is today.
Interesting. Other issues that the slate felt strongly about? You said openness to government. I guess one thing is you wanted to broadcast the city meetings.
Broadcasting the council meetings was a big step forward, a tremendous step forward to including the community in the legislative process, the city legislative process. And I think a lot of people did not feel welcome at the meetings before that, and we undertook steps to make people feel welcome when they came before the council to speak and really listen to people's wishes rather than special interests, as I said, whose priority was economic growth rather than preserving Carpinteria's charm.
Other things come to mind that the slate promoted?
We really had our hands full with the city's finances, and the bluffs and the nature of Carpinteria was a priority. Subsequent to that, we undertook to amend the city's general plan in line with those priorities of preserving the nature of Carpinteria. We undertook to contract with the Sheriff's Department for police services, which saved a lot of money and was one of the things that I think is still benefiting the city today. It was very expensive to run a police force for a small city at that time, and it still is. And it just made more sense to go with a larger agency that had the infrastructure in place for special investigations and that kind of thing, and special programs that benefit the community, school programs and neighborhood programs, and even programs that benefited the homeless at that time by intervening and having a non-penal alternative. The officers have been very responsive, were when I was on the city council, to not arresting people for being poor, but to helping them, to providing opportunities for them, alternatives to homelessness on the streets. And that needs to still be a priority, but it's getting harder, I think, as the number of homeless people in town grows.
What other ways did you employ to save the city money?
As I say, we undertook a restructuring of the employee structure at City Hall. Some positions were pared away, consolidated. That's about it on that.
Okay. What were some of the developments that the slate didn't like or that were unpopular that motivated you to run? Were there some?
One thing that was cited often is the industrial area just as you come into town at the north end of Carpinteria Avenue. Those style of buildings are called concrete tilt-ups. They're pretty featureless, slab-like buildings. And it was that kind of development that was thought to be the opposite of how we wanted Carpinteria to develop in the future. We wanted some kind of neighborhood standards that would have development that didn't change the character of neighborhoods and kept Carpinteria's special charm rather than made it look like more highly developed areas or industrial areas.
When were those built approximately, do you know?
They would have been built during the 1980s before we took office.
Do you know if it was the early 80s or late 80s?
I'm afraid I don't.
Okay. What were some of the big issues or concerns or developments while you were in office?
Well, it's hard for me to remember now. It's been quite a while ago.
Well, was freeway widening one of them?
Freeway widening has always been an item of controversy.
And what was the controversy, or still is?
The freeway widening was thought to be a good thing, but the exact way it was done was always something that was up for discussion and was hard to get community consensus on, since it might take areas away from neighborhoods or result in widening of the overpasses in a way that made them more big city and less like Carpinteria. Also, the comprehensive creek program that was put into place would be affected by the construction of bridges like that.
How about the issue of greenhouses? What were some of the issues you were involved with that?
Well, that was always a frustrating issue because those are structures that affect the citizens of Carpinteria, but over which we really had no control since they were in the county jurisdiction. And you can tell at night now when you drive in that area how they're even more extensively and more intensely used than previously, where lights go on all night long, for example. And another issue now is water use. As agriculture gets more intensive, more and more water is used. Whether there's adequate control on how much water is pumped out of the ground by agricultural interests is a matter for discussion, I think.
Any other issues come to mind? There was the freeway, there was ag, overcrowding.
Neighborhood overcrowding was again something that the community was concerned about, but over which local governments really have not a great deal of control, since the standards for how many people can live in a house are established by state building codes. And so the only control local agencies have over that is parking controls and things like that. Development standards that control the way houses can be expanded, for example, as well. Other issues that came up when we were on the council were the development of pocket parks. And there are now parks that weren't previously there. There's one by the mobile home park off of Villa Real, by the creek. There's one at the corner of Linden and Carpinteria Avenue, that small park there. There's the property that's now occupied by the Friends of the Library. That was acquired during my tenure on the city council. Discussion was had of moving City Hall to a more central location downtown. That's something I think that should still be considered. And it may be that the present City Hall site can be traded with other agencies and used as a consolidated yard for vehicles, for example, and that the City Hall could then move to a more central location downtown where it might stimulate economic growth there. On policies.
Mike, tell me about the visioning process. What was that and how did it affect the community?
That was a process by which citizens were invited to participate in a body of people that would collaborate and deliberate on the city's future and decide how the city wanted to look 10 or 20 years in the future, so that policies could be put into place to bring that into effect, which is a very good thing for cities to do, rather than take decisions one day at a time, 1 week at a time, 1 year at a time even. To have a long-term vision of where you want the city to be 20 years in the future is a great thing. And that was an excellent process brought into the city's wheelhouse by some of the city managers that were hired after we were put in office. Certainly it was a great benefit to have Dave Derflinger hired as city manager, and that was an accomplishment I'm proud of. I think Dave's been a great manager. He's very in tune with what the community wants and very willing to listen to people and put the community's vision into effect for the city, rather than lead the city around according to whatever he might prefer. It's I think a model that could be learned from by other jurisdictions, that you benefit the people who are here, you benefit the voters who are here, rather than people who might pay money into your campaign fund, for example. And that's something of concern to me that I see in other communities and in higher state and local agencies even, that it's the people with the most money that get elected, and they are then beholden to the people who fill their campaign coffers. It was always my idea that the city should be run for the community, for the benefit of the people who live here, for the benefit of the voters who put you in, rather than the people who paid for your campaign.
Those are good words about Dave Derflinger. Are there any other people that come to mind, characters or good deeds or others that you can mention during your tenure?
Well, I think we have been very lucky with city staff. Matt Roberts is a great park and recreation manager. Jackie Campbell's a great community development director. Charlie Ebling has done great work in public works. We need people like that who are willing, again, to put the community's vision into effect in the city's policies. And we've been very lucky, I think, in the city's staffing.
Any citizens who made presentations to City Hall come to mind?
Bill Carty was very active, and it was always a pleasure to see him come and give his thoughts to the community. There are other people. Ted Rhodes was one who spoke frequently. Arturo Teo spoke frequently to the council when I was a member. Everyone who came and shared their thoughts with the council, I think, was a valuable contributor to the city's policies in that time.
Were there any gadflies that come to mind?
There's Dr. Hillary Williams. Do you recall him?
I was hoping you'd mention. I was there the day he took off some clothes.
Yes.
Tell me that story.
He was widely interested in a variety of topics, some of which were within the city's jurisdiction, some of which were not. But his presentations were really unique. He would come, as you say, he would take off clothes, he would pound on the podium, he would read poetry, he would give you sheets of paper covered with the tiniest scrawl you can imagine, where one 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper had maybe 2,000 or 3,000 words on it. He was a character.
And what do you think is an influence of somebody like that to the community? Good, bad, indifferent? Comic relief?
Well, you know, truth is where you find it. And because someone is a unique character, because they have an unusual way of expressing themselves, doesn't mean that they're always wrong. Doesn't mean that they're not worthy of being listened to. And that was a lesson worth learning. So I think truth is where you find it. It's a lesson.
I remember the time he made a presentation. He was all bundled up and he said, "I take my hat off to you, Brad Stein," and he took his sweater off to another council member, and then I think he's starting getting down to taking his pants off when Donna Jordan said, "I think that's enough."
He would repeat those performances for the Board of Supervisors sometimes as well.
That's funny.
If he got a good response, he would take the show down to Santa Barbara.
Were there any city council people that you particularly disagreed with or think were harmful to the city?
Oh, I wouldn't say that. I disagreed frequently with Joe Armendariz and Greg Gandrud, but I found them to be very sincere individuals that were legitimately trying to advance a viewpoint that they thought needed to be advanced. So I have no ill feelings toward them at all. I just disagreed with them. One thing that I disagree with is the putting economic concerns above environmental concerns. It seems fracking is a good example. It seems to me that you create a number of jobs, but they're short-term jobs, and the environmental cost of those jobs is far too high. And it would be much better to create jobs by looking for alternative energy sources rather than continuing to rely on petroleum. It's not often thought of, but population growth is an exponential thing. If we continue to rely on petroleum, there will certainly come a time where we simply run out, or where the prices get too high that it would be prohibitive to continue to use the energy source. And so it's a much smarter way to proceed, I think, to create jobs in looking for alternatives rather than fracking, for example, is a prime concern of mine. The pumping of poisonous water along with industrial waste into the ground to loosen up oil is only a short-term gain. Only gets you the very marginal production of oil that maybe should be left in the ground. Causes earthquakes in places like Oklahoma that have never had earthquakes before, and it's very difficult to assess the total environmental effect because it's only been done for a short time. But the idea that you can pump hot water and industrial waste into the earth to obtain some marginal amount of oil just seems so short-sighted to me. We really need to look into other ways of creating jobs.
Talk about downtown improvements that have occurred here in the city.
Well, we undertook some downtown improvements that were controversial at the time, some bulb outs they're called, to establish more defined parking areas. Whether that was a good idea, I'm still not sure of. It seems to me the kind of thing that takes up space. You create planting areas that are attractive, but you might have done that in the existing right-of-way, and now we are concerned about how much we have to water the existing landscaping on city areas. Certainly as the population increases and the downtown is more intensively used, the spaces that are dedicated to bulb outs might better be used for traffic flow. So I think that's, there's always a trade-off in that area. When you make something attractive by taking up right-of-way, you need to weigh those different things and what's the best use of that area. It's important.
By the way, when were the bulb outs done approximately? What years?
Oh, I would say late 90s for that.
Okay, and you were saying?
It's important to have an attractive downtown and one that where economic activity can be based. And I think the council has always regarded that priority as something that they need to take an active role in. And I think that we've done a good job in establishing that downtown. There are vacancies downtown that are persistent, and one wonders whether the rents that are being charged are actually in line with real estate values and what's being charged in other communities. But I think now there are mostly filled spaces downtown. There are fewer vacancies. I think that's good.
There have been some issues over the years of kind of the chamber versus environmentalists, or how would you describe it?
I think there's always going to be friction there between people whose priority is economic activity and people whose priority is maintaining the small town charm of Carpinteria. Certainly it would be better for those interested in economic activity as a priority if more and more people came here. And certainly that is also something that is erosive of your small town character when the traffic gets to be too much, when streets are either filled to capacity all the time, when traffic jams occur, or when streets have to be widened, removing historic buildings, for example, and other improvements that are of value to the community. So I think there's always going to be that friction, and there's always going to be a need to establish a balance. And the community's wishes need to be a priority there. You can't let the city be run by people whose priority or whose only interest in the city, because they don't live here, is establishing the greatest economic activity possible. That is always something that's going to affect the community negatively in terms of its existing improvements, its existing parkland, its historic buildings, and the ability for people who live here to enjoy a city that is not crowded to the max.
So any natural disasters or flooding come to mind?
Ash Avenue used to be terribly prone to flooding during heavy rain events, and it would flood all the way up to the Silver Sands Mobile Home Park. And some improvements were put in to stop that flooding from happening. Some changes in grade were put in. Some directed drainage was put in to carry the water out. But the construction of the beach berm really helped in winter storms for a time, because the wave action was erosive of the beach and prone to come right up the beach ends up into the city streets and cause damage to public and private property.
Do you care to talk about the trains?
Sure. When I was on the council, it was an effort was taken to reestablish the historic train station that was there, and various plans were reviewed. But the main thrust was to get the train to stop here and to use the train as an alternative transportation rather than having everyone rely on the freeway and on their cars. So it was a big step forward to get the train to stop in Carpinteria again. Not widely known now, but for many, many years the train stopped not in Carpinteria but only in Santa Barbara, and so Carpinteria's citizens were not able to take advantage of the public right-of-way that the train used. It was a big step forward to have a stop of the train here in Carpinteria, both for visitors who can come to Carpinteria without using their cars, and for people who live in Carpinteria who want to travel up and down the state. And so that was a tremendous step forward, and one that was supported by the city council, and I think they obtained that benefit for the citizens, which is, as I say, is a big step.
Do you know about when it was reestablished, the train stop? And I can find that out if you don't know.
I don't know offhand, no.
Okay.
I think again during the 1990s, the late 90s probably.
How did it come about that we got train service here again? Do you know?
I don't know exactly how it was. It's the kind of thing where you have to work with Amtrak and with their scheduling and convince them that there's enough of a benefit and there will be enough ridership that will make the stop justified and worthwhile. So that was done, and they undertook to establish the new improvements in Carpinteria by the train tracks to allow passenger loading and unloading, and allow the train to stop there safely, to use the parking lot at that location for train uses as well as downtown parking. And in that area as well, partnership was undertaken with the state park to use their parking lot as beach parking for Carpinteria's beaches as well. And the partnership with the state park has proven to be a very valuable one for joint stewardship of the beach area and enforcement of the laws and regulations that pertain to the beaches and keep public safety a priority.
So thank you, Mike. Any final comments you'd like to make?
Well, I'd like to say that my service on the City Council was one of the highlights of my life. My daughter was born in 1990 when I was first elected to the City Council, and grew up with me being mayor and a City Council member for that time of that 16 or 18 years period. That was I think very rewarding for me, and something that provided a good example for her of community involvement and leadership, and how to provide a benefit to the people that are your neighbors and your friends. And my wife and I have both benefited from that, from knowing a lot of people we would not otherwise have known, from getting to know Donna Jordan and Brad Stein, for example, who were partners of ours when we went on the City Council, and social friends thereafter for many years, and other people that we might not have gotten to know quite as well. So it was highly beneficial for personal growth, and you know, the opportunity to do something for your community is certainly one of the highest things that you can run across in your life. And if you have that kind of opportunity, it's a benefit to you as well, and can lead you to personal growth in areas you beyond those which you would otherwise have. And so it's an opportunity that I would advise anyone to take advantage of if you get that opportunity.
Well, Mike, I want to thank you so much for your community service, and you're a great guy, and thanks a lot.
Thank you.